We want to welcome you to our Weary World Rejoicing series. We know that a lot of times when we think of Christmas, our first thoughts are the sparkling lights or the tinsel or all the joy that comes to the world. But the truth is that Christmas has always had a little bit of darkness to it. The church has a long tradition of practicing Advent, of recognizing this season right before Christmas, when we think about how the world is not quite the world that God intended for it to be yet, how we're on our way to something better. And so we recognize that this season, that this year has not been what we dreamed that it would be. And yet we still want to find our way to rejoice, that even in our exhaustion and our weariness, we want to find a way to celebrate this truth, that God loved us so much that God came close to us in the person of Jesus. So we want to recognize all the moods that are in the room this season, that we're tired, but we have cause to rejoice. And nothing really captures that quite like this song that you're going to hear. It's one of the saddest but most beautiful Christmas songs. It got its start in the movie Meet Me in St. Louis, where Judy Garland is sad that her family's going to move away, that they're going to be separated, that she has to leave her home. There's all this sadness to their Christmas celebration. And so she finds a song to sing to her little sister, a song that captures what it is when Christmas finds you in a world that's not exactly what you wanted. So listen in, let this song invite you into a different kind of Christmas.
Heart beat
Whenever we listen to stories or we watch or we read stories, we often have an entry point in. We have something in the story that we connect to that lets us place ourselves inside the story. And a lot of times that entry point is something that we connect with. It's something that we share with one of the heroes. A lot of my favorite stories have like a bookish brown-haired girl so that I can see my way into the story and what part I would play if I was a player in the story. And this is why it's such a big deal when the movie directors, when they add in Wonder Woman or Black Panther or even Spider-Man, right? Like somebody who doesn't fit that superhero mold. And when they do that, more and more people can find their way into these stories of superhumans. It connects them. It's an entry point into what it could be like to be extraordinary. We look for ways to place ourselves in our favorite stories. So this Christmas, as we celebrate this great and true story, we wanted to find a common entry point. Is there some shared point of connection for us so that we could go into the story together? Sometimes we share something with the player in these stories. And so since we were trying to think, is there some way we all can connect? It's harder to find something we can all agree on this year. I could really only think of two things. One, we all still agree that Dolly Parton is awesome. But that doesn't get us any closer to Christmas, so that wouldn't work as an entry point. So we thought of a second thing that we all share in common at the end of this divisive and difficult year. We are tired. We are a weary world. And so our way into the Christmas story this year might be through exhaustion. But what we want to do is to not just stay in that tired place, but to find a way this season that helps us rejoice. We're going to start with the story of Zechariah. Luke is the only gospel writer who really gives us the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth, who have kind of a parallel story to the story of Joseph and Mary. And there's a few things we need to know about Zechariah. It tells us in Luke 1 that Zechariah, he belonged to the priestly order of Abijah. And all that means for us is that Zechariah's dad was a priest, and Zechariah's grandpa was a priest. And Zechariah's grandpa's grandpa was a priest. And you could keep going. The things that we see Zechariah doing in this story, they go all the way back to Exodus 30. They go all the way back to the beginning of the story. Zechariah and his family have been doing things in the temple for a very long time. And when we enter into this story here, we find Zechariah in the holiest place in the temple. He's been chosen out of all the other priests in this moment to go into the holiest part of the temple and to retrieve a message for the people of God. Now, Zechariah has prepared his entire life for this moment. It is a special honor. And in this particular moment, he is the only person who gets to go into this part of the temple. There's even this legend, people don't know if it's true or not, but it survived for a long time because it sounded so true. There was this legend that when a priest would go into this holy place, that they would tie a rope around their ankle. And the idea of that is that if they were shocked or if they fainted or even if they perished because God showed up, nobody else could go in there to get them. If God showed up and they had a heart attack or they saw the face of God and it knocked them out, they would use this rope to pull them out of the temple. Now, they don't know for sure if this is true, but it held on as a legend because it sounded so true that there was this holy place and only one person was chosen to go in there a few times a year. And on this day, it's Zechariah. Now, on a personal note, that's his professional life. But on a personal note, Zechariah is married to Elizabeth. And they're old enough that in this culture, they should have children, but they don't. And for both of them, I imagine, this is a source of disappointment and it's a source of disgrace. And so when we find Zechariah in this moment, maybe he's doing the thing that a lot of us do. He's using this as a moment when he can practice some control over something. He knows what to do at work when he doesn't always know what to do at home with his wife who's dealing with this isolation and this disgrace. When Zechariah would go into the temple, there's a few things that we know they did, even though only certain people got to go in there. They would repeat the Shema, the Lord your God is one. They would often repeat the 10 Commandments. They had to memorize them and they would recite them. They would light just the right candle in just the right spot. They would put the incense in just the right place. It's all of these mechanics that they would do to kind of contrive this moment when they would hope that God would show up. And then they would listen. They would have to wait for a moment from God. And all this ritual is a way for them to control the uncontrollable in the hopes that they would get some kind of blessing. And maybe this is a way into the story for us, because Zechariah's life feels out of his control. Think about it. Not only is he dealing with this disappointment, this disgrace that he and Elizabeth have not produced an heir, that they haven't kept the family business going. He's also dealing with this career that was handed down to him. He had no say in whether he became a priest. And when you're in that place where nothing feels like it's in your control, you lean into what you can control. Maybe you know this feeling. I've had this feeling a lot over the last few years. There was a moment a couple years ago where I found myself so out of control that I was cleaning the bottom of the shower drain, like just to practice some control over something. Like I can't control any of these big giant things, but I can make sure that the bottom of my shower drain is cleared out, right? This one thing I have control over. It was a ridiculous moment. Never do that. But it's an impulse we have, and maybe we can understand this. This moment for Zechariah, maybe it feels like a test that he wants to get something right. Not only does he want to get something right, he wants to bring something to the community. He doesn't just feel personal pressure, he feels communal pressure. And maybe this is our way into this story. Maybe this is how we connect to Zechariah. Maybe this is how we enter into Christmas the way that he did. Because a lot of this year, for a lot of us, has felt like a test. The answers to what we're supposed to do have shifted and changed. The rituals have all changed. We're trying to manage things by building in all these rituals. And maybe it's even greater than just 2020 and this phenomenon and pandemic. Some of us have seen all of our life as a test, has an obstacle course, has a final exam. We pray like it's a test. Like if we say the right words and we light the right candle, God will show up. We show up to church as a test, that if we go through all the right motions, maybe God will show up. Can I tell you what I love about this story? Is that there are a lot of stories in the Bible where God doesn't show up, right? Like people go through all the motions and then God doesn't show up in the place they expect. This isn't a story about God not showing up. The rest of the Christmas story is an account of how wild God is, how God does something that no one can imagine, right? God showing up in the life of Joseph and Mary throws all their plans out of whack. It's completely unimaginable, unexpected. This isn't a story about God not showing up. This is a story about God showing up exactly when Zechariah should have expected it. And it is terrifying. It's still challenging. And the funny thing is that Zechariah, he's gone through all these motions. He's said all the right things. He's lit all the right candles. And God shows up right when he thought he would. And it still causes doubt. An angel shows up in this holy place. Who would have thought? He should have thought God will show up here. This angel shows up and tells Zechariah that Elizabeth will carry a son. And not only that, but this son will change the world. And even more than that, the God that you have been looking for in this room is on the move. That this Messiah that your grandpa's grandpa has been waiting for is about to come onto the scene. And Zechariah's response to God showing up and saying exactly what generations have been hoping God would say is doubt. And he asks, how in the world can this happen? If this is a test, he fails. And God's response is to impose a silence on Zechariah. He basically tells him, just think about what you've done. So when Zechariah leaves the temple, all these people are gathered because this is one of these rare moments when they're expecting that he's going to have something to say from God. He's going to pass along a great word. and all he has to give them is silence. There's this funny moment where it says that he tried to communicate everything that had happened. It's this awful game of charades where he can't speak, so he just tries to gesture everything that the angel of God has told him, but he can't find any words. It's unspeakable. He's not allowed to say it. Zechariah is silent for 9 months, which is either a blessing to his wife or a curse. She has less cause for doubt. We only get glimpses of Elizabeth's story. She has less doubt because she feels this blessing in her belly. She goes about her life. She visits with Mary. It tells us that when Elizabeth and Mary see each other, that the babies in their womb dance together because they know their stories are connected. She has one-sided conversations with her husband about the name of the baby. It's only when the baby is born that Zechariah is finally free to speak. There's this beautiful moment where he affirms Elizabeth's name choice. This child will be John, eventually John the Baptist, the prophet, the priest. Eventually he'll be John the persecuted. But listen to what Zechariah finally says when he breaks his silence. Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he has looked favorably on his people and redeemed them. He has raised up a mighty Savior for us in the house of his servant David. In other words, he's done what he always said he would do. As he spoke through the mouth of his holy prophets from of old, that we would be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us. He has shown mercy promised to our ancestors. He has remembered his holy covenant, the oath that he swore to our ancestor Abraham that goes all the way back to the beginning of the story. He has granted us that we would be rescued from the hands of our enemies and that we would serve him without fear, that we would serve him in holiness and righteousness before him all of our days. And you, child, he says to his son, you will be called a prophet of the Most High. You will go before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give knowledge of salvation to his people and the forgiveness of their sins. And then he says these good words. The unspeakable becomes the speakable. He says, by the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, and to guide our feet into the way of peace. He has this time in the sanctuary. He has time in silence. But when Zechariah finally has a word of blessing worth passing along, it is a very simple message. He says, God does not forget us. Even when we're just going through the motions, even when we're trying so hard to control the uncontrollable, even when we can't see the God in front of our face, life isn't a test, it is a song. And the drums will always come in at just the right time. The Spirit of God moves sometimes when you most expect it. The only question is the same one that Zechariah had to him, whether you'll trust it. If you are tired this year of feeling tested, let this season, let this story remind you that Jesus is near. I do not say this lightly. I shared a part of my own story during our grief season. I spent the first half of this year caring for my parents in hospice. I spent the second half of this year grieving my parents. And all I can say is God did not forget me. It's still unspeakable to me in a lot of ways, but I can tell you that these words from Zechariah have been true for me. The dawn from on high will break upon us. It will give light to those who sit in darkness, to all those who are in the shadow of death, and it will guide our feet into a way of peace. And once you know that, and once it's true for you, it's on you to pass the word along. Words from God aren't meant to stay in the sanctuary. When we're in a weary world, when everyone is tired, more than anything right now, the people of God ought to use this season to tell the world, not a single one of us is forgotten. And life is not a test. It's a song. It's a story. Would you join Zechariah this week, this month, this Christmas? Let the whole world know God is close. Pass this blessing along. God has not forgotten us. Would you spend some time in the sanctuary this week? Maybe you sit with Luke 1. Sit with the song of Mary. Sit with the song of Zechariah. Let the drums of Christmas kind of play in your ear. Let the song cover you. Remember that God does not forget us. We can wait generations. We can wait a year. We can wait weeks. And God will show up sometimes when you most expect it.
When they need someone to say all the right words, move in all the right ways, light up all the right space, keep everything in place, keep the rules they speak and the rules they don't speak, they send him in. He checks his clothes, his beard, his heart, and his hands. He's there because his father was, and his father before that. Fathers and grandfathers, grandfathers of grandfathers. Years of showing up and hoping for a word worth repeating. Speak right, move right, stand right, live right, repeat, for life. When he hears a voice where he has only heard quiet, the news that there is life when he has only known emptiness. Of course he asks, how? He could only imagine the word would be an old word, that the only thing a God would do would be what a God has always done. He forgets that what this old God does is to make things new. He forgets that what this ancient God always remembers is you. And when you're in this kind of room, there is only one right thing: to keep the silence until you're ready to sing.